Hey everybody, it's Chris and Rick Talk Guitars, and this is part two of Rick Builds a Guitar. So, for those of you who don't know, probably over 2 years ago now, I embarked on building a classical guitar because it's something I've always wanted to do. Build an acoustic guitar, especially, but classical for some reason. I don't know. And I did it. I completed the guitar. It took me about 2 years because I had to not only build the guitar, but build all the tooling involved that I needed to make this dang thing. And I gotta say, and Chris and I thought it would be cool to talk about since we talked about kind of as I was embarking on that project over 2 years ago. But it's really cool. It's cool. I've accomplished my goal. I've got wood to build some other guitars, so I will try to build more guitars. But for this one, I was pleasantly surprised at the outcome. It's a great looking guitar and it's a good sounding guitar. And I think there's some things I can learn to get the sound better as I embark on this journey. But overall, for my first try, I gotta say, I think it's a really cool guitar. And I got good feedback from some people that I've showed it. I showed it to Chris. I got good feedback from him. I showed it to some other cats that are kind of steeped in classical guitar knowledge, and they gave me a good thumbs up in terms of a good first try on the guitar. So what questions do you have for me, Chris? The luthier. I can now I can call myself a luthier.
You can call yourself a luthier as opposed to somebody who changes a set of strings and calls himself a luthier. If you don't show up with your guitar on horseback, you're not a luthier. Look, can we just drop this pretentious word? So, I mean, even violinists, people like
Right.
a classy instrument like violinists, they're not luthiers. They're
No,
violin makers
fiddle makers.
or violin makers. Yeah, we don't need this to use that word. God damn it. Stop with the luthier. Unless you're going to go to the apothecary and pick up some fucking medicine. I mean,
Couple drams
no,
of medication.
yeah, a couple of drams of medicine. Oh, what was I going to? What was I going to say? I was questions for. Oh, I said it sounds like you're gonna continue on and build another one,
I
and that's
am.
great that you have all that tooling because
Yeah.
that I mean, putting that much time into it, you almost gotta build another one.
Right? Yeah, because you put so much time into the tooling itself. So yeah, for sure.
The guitar is amazing. I'm glad you brought it over. And the thing that struck me when I'm kind of playing it and checking it out is a guitar is a beautiful work of art. You know what I mean?
It really is.
It kind of made me marvel at these things that we never take for granted. But, in the last 10 years, or I don't know how long it's been, but a lot of people seem to be under the assumption that since they came out with CNC, that you just push a button and a guitar comes out.
Right, right.
And you made that guitar and it was 100% hands-on.
Yep.
Even the standard D18 or something like that, that's like tons and tons of hands-on
Yep.
labor. It's still,
Exactly.
CNC will save some steps, and that's what I was going to ask you about. So anyone listening knows you didn't just like buy a neck somewhere.
No.
You like carved the piece of wood and made the neck. You didn't just buy like a fretboard with frets on it. You cut the ebony and shaped it and put the frets in yourself.
Yep.
So you did everything. So it wasn't like just slapping a guitar from a kit together. You made the thing from scratch. It didn't exist at all until you made it. And that's pretty fucking cool.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I'm glad you're going to make another one because you're going to make me one. No. But I had a question for you. Could you see yourself ever making an electric guitar? And if you did, what model would you go for?
That's a great question. And yes, I think about it all the time because that is fun. I've made a couple electrics in the past. The first one I made in high school was a complete shit show. I knew nothing about building a guitar and I didn't even do any research on building a guitar. I just winged it based on
That would
kind
be
of
me, yeah.
yeah. And I just winged it. But my second one was a little better. I knew a little more and yes, now I do want to build one. And I've been kind of toying with kind of a junior style guitar.
That's what I was going to say.
Yep, like a slab of
Melody Maker or a
mahogany.
junior?
Yep,
Yeah, yeah.
like a slab of mahogany with a mahogany neck, probably P90s, something real simple but cool and well built. Yeah, so yeah, that's been on my mind is building an electric for sure.
That's probably what I would do. I mean, the easy thing to do would be to slap a Fender style guitar together. And, that would be cool. I wouldn't mind doing that too. But I think I would like to do something a little different. I would like to do a set neck guitar. And if I'm going to do that, it's like, I don't want to do a carved top. That's too much.
Yeah.
But, a all slab mahogany guitar would sound pretty great. And it would probably, and just seeing how that guitar of yours turned out, if you made a Gibson style guitar, that would be super fucking cool. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I think it's in my future, but I definitely want to build a couple more acoustics to just get that process on. It's a lifelong learning process, but I want to get more into the weeds on the different processes surrounding making an acoustic guitar.
So
Yeah,
do you
for
think
sure.
you'd do a steel string? Like,
Yeah, I'd
that
like
would
to
be
do.
cool because the
Yep.
bracing is really fascinating
Yep.
to me. Like how you can study all the bracing. And that's what, I mean, I know that you followed, like, was it a video series class that you,
Yeah, so it was a video series, and then he also gave me plans to download, which I had to resize and use as a template for this guitar. Yeah.
so did you do any like generic, just poking around, like the history of like tuning tops and, or anything like that, or just followed what he said kind of just to keep on that a track or whatever?
Yeah, so I did do some research, loose research on top tuning and stuff like that, but I basically just tried to follow his process verbatim and because he's been building guitars for over 20 years. He's in Spain. He builds classical guitars, and over time he has kind of come to this design and process through trial and error. And his plans are kind of an amalgamation of like Hauser, Torres, Ramirez. These are all kind of historically
Hondo.
Hondo, Yamaha. No, but these are all kind of classical guitar builders that are pretty prominent in that realm of guitar, classical guitar world. So I was kind of basically I was started from like second base, right, as a beginner because I had his learning to go from, right? So yeah, so it was pretty handy to have his plans and his videos step by step to help me through the process.
And yeah, taking out all of the pitfalls for you that you would find if you just tried to wing it on your own.
Oh,
That's
totally.
that's what I thought about. If I tried to do that, even if I had the same like instruction and stuff like that, you said it took you like 2.5 years.
Yeah.
I would have done it in 2 weeks and it would have been a piece of shit. Because I have no patience for that kind of thing. Like, I built the shed, like the studio
Yeah.
shed here.
Yeah.
And Tracy's like, don't you want to get some plans or anything? I'm like, fuck that. I'm just going to build it. So I just built it, like winged it.
And that's me too.
Overbuilt, yeah, and just ridiculous. But it's not. I mean, especially like the drywall. It's like,
Yeah.
who the hell did this in here? So, but when you do something like that, and this is another question I was going to ask you,
Yeah.
is suddenly you have all this respect for things that for steps of this process. Like I'm talking
Yep.
about a shed, but like. Now that making a nut is no fucking easy thing.
No.
It's not just something you don't buy a plastic nut on the internet and put it on your guitar and your guitar's, oh, it's great. And that leads me to another question. So do you think that you have a lot of valuable new skills that you apply to your other guitars now? Because I know in the past you've tended to like kind of shy away from maybe doing some sort of things, but I'm thinking now, like you get a guitar, maybe the nut's a little higher, something you'd be comfortable just kind of tweaking it and stuff now.
Yes. Yeah. And that's a great
super
question.
valuable. Yeah.
It is. And yeah, and it did two things in terms of just educating me about these processes, like setting up the saddle and the nut on the classical guitar. And then also just getting kind of past the hump of it being a daunting thing in my head, right? Of, oh my God, I don't want to screw this up. It's like, okay, you screw it up and you buy a new nut blank and try
Right.
again, like, and so, and to your point about patience, I'm the same way. I think you and I are very much alike in terms of when I did stuff, I still do stuff. I want it to be done now, and I'm going to bust my ass to get it done. But one thing this process did teach me is patience.
That's good.
Because I didn't want to fuck it up. And like I said before, every step of the process, I'm like, oh shit, I'm going to fuck this up. Somehow I'm going to screw this up. But sure enough, it's a very forgiving process, which I learned, which to my joy, you think you make one small error and it's going to just be the end of the guitar, but that's not the case at all. And it just taught me patience. It's like, okay, I worked on this thing all day. It's getting dark. Just put it away. It'll be here tomorrow. Let this part of the process sit. Or if I got stumped, because I mean, he shows you a lot of the stuff on the video, but some of the stuff is a little nebulous still because, and so I do it or I try to get as prepared as I can and get all the information I can and the measurements and stuff. And then I do it and I'm like, oh, and I'm in the process. And then there's a couple things that he didn't cover. And I'm like, oh, fuck, what do I do? It's like, okay, well, I'm just going to think about it and try to use my own, brain to come up with solutions. And I did. It was really cool. And so I would say some of the really great takeaways for me were, learning patience and learning to wait and not try to do everything in one shot. And then also that, a lot of these things we think are kind of make or break, or there's a part in the process where it's going to be, you're going to have to throw it all away, is not necessarily the case. It's a forgiving process, which is so cool because, literally, there was a couple times in this process cutting the slots for the sides in the neck and the heel of the thing. I didn't do as precisely as I wanted to, and I thought there'd be a bigger gap than there was, but there wasn't, and it turned out fine. And then there was another part, like when I was building the neck, and you have to stack pieces of wood for the heel, of the, like it was a little shallower than it was supposed to be. So I just glued another piece of mahogany on there and then filed it down, and it worked. So yeah, so it's like, yeah, it just taught me that patience is really important. And then also, hey, don't worry too much about it. Come at it tomorrow and try to figure it out and get through it, and it won't be the end of the world. So yeah, it was pretty cool.
And it's so funny. A lot of those little things you mentioned right now, it's kind of like we're moving away from everybody. Everybody wants to, everything to be like super perfect. And it's like a handmade guitar is not always that perfect. You know what I mean?
Totally.
It's usually something you find a little flaw here or there. You're like, great, somebody actually sat with this. I mean, you think about this in 2025 now, I guess. See, I caught that. It's still somebody at Martin that sits there and takes a neck and a dovetail, and by hand he works with it until he gets it to fit. That's
exactly
the same thing as like 300 years or whatever. I don't know. Maybe it's not 300. When you were talking about like the instructions and like, sometimes things being a little nebulous, I just get this picture of following a video and you're doing like one of the more complex things, and it'd be like, and for this next step, you'll drop out in the video, and then, okay, now for this next step, we're going to fuck.
Now to finish the guitar.
No, that is super cool. And it kind of made me, even though I'm like making a guitar was never anything that I wanted to do. I was more of like an effect amp guy, but that's when I got on that thought. And it's funny you said a Junior too. It's like, if I were going to make a guitar, I would make a Junior or even a melody. I'd probably make a melody maker because I have a Junior. There's so many options for good pickups and, nice mahogany. It would be fucking great. I mean,
and it's so rewarding. Like you were saying before, we've seen things go from when we were kids to be really more handmade and more manufacturing was around, to modern days where a lot of automation takes place. And like you said, though, in certain instances, in certain industries, there's still a lot of handwork that does go on in this stuff. And for me, doing this process, I've always had an appreciation and respect for people who build things with their hands and do these kinds of things, because to your point, they are guitars to me and you are works of art, and especially acoustic guitars, because there's so much more you have to worry about in terms of getting a good sound out of that box, essentially. And yeah, this process totally reinforced my respect for people who do this and take it seriously and really get into the weeds and care about quality and care about producing this thing. And exactly like you're saying, I love people who appreciate a hand-built item. It's not going to be perfect, but that's the whole idea is this was built by hand by a person. And what you are getting is you're getting good wood. Hopefully they're using good components, and then you're getting their best effort and their knowledge and their experience put into this piece of art that is going to give you a great sound, and it's going to feel good. And luckily, people in the classical guitar world really do appreciate that. I mean, luthier built guitars are super sought after and respected. So I really dig that about that area of the guitar world. And there are people in the other parts of the guitar world too that really appreciate handmade guitars and boutique guitars or stuff where some human has given a shit about what they're producing, So yeah, so that's another thing that was just cool, is just a renewed respect for people who do this kind of thing and build things, whether it's guitars or anything really. Hot rods.
And even in the context of like a giant corporation like Fender or Gibson or something like that, it's really interesting. At one time I had like a Mexican standard Stratocaster, and I had what was it? It was like a
that reissue
Stratocaster. And I had another Stratocaster that was like between those. And you can feel it. It's totally interesting because with a Fender guitar, there's a lot less difference given the nature of the way the guitar is made. There's not a whole lot of difference in the way that it's made and the materials and stuff. Whereas a Gibson, it's a little bit different, but you could feel it. The Mexican standard Stratocasters are great for the money. They're awesome. But then you pick up the next one up, whatever it is, like maybe the American standard, and you're like, oh, the shoulder of the neck feels a little bit better. You know, it's a little more
Yeah.
rounded and stuff like that. And then you get up to the next one, it's like, oh man, they kind of rolled the edges here and it feels different. And then you go to the custom shop and it's like it's way different, you know?
Yeah.
So that's
Yep.
what you're paying for. You're paying for more personal one-on-one time with your guitar.
Yep.
You'll hear the argument that there's no difference between this guitar and that guitar, but there definitely is. And you know, the more you play, the more you appreciate that.
Yeah. And I think that's why I was drawn to classical guitar so much is I can just picture these builders, you know, in the early days, like maybe doing this shit by candlelight or whatever, or you know what I mean? Like, or having to use all hand tools to build these guitars, you know, no power tools at all. And that, to me, that mad respect to people who can do that stuff. Cause I have the, you know, for me, I can use a table saw, a bandsaw. I've got a drum sander. So I've got some modern tools. I mean, it's all built by hand by me, but I have the benefit of some of these electric tools that help me thickness material faster and easier than some of these cats did. So that's kind of one of the things I think I was drawn to too about classical guitars is just the history of them. And they kind of lit the fire. Classical guitars, you know, kind of lit the fire for modern guitar culture, you could say. Before Andre Segovia, classical guitar was pissed on, really. It was just looked at as this inferior instrument that, you know, who would want to play that guitar, you know, but he and other people, but he was kind of at the forefront, brought it into its own and showed people that this can be an instrument that can be played by a virtuoso and move people as much as an orchestra or any other instrument that was popular at the time, like the piano. So I think that's really what drew me to the classical guitar so much is just kind of its history and thinking of these builders that were building these beautiful guitars by hand and the tradition of that whole thing, you know, kind of caught me, you know?
Right. And with the exception of like the tuners, there's no fucking screws
Right.
on those things. You know what I mean? It's
Oh,
all wood. And when you're talking about people without power tools, you know, with just making them with hand tools,
yeah.
it lends itself well to that.
Oh,
And I'm
yeah.
surprised there's nobody right now that claims that aliens helped them build those guitars because there's no way we could have that kind of technology back then. Or the people were that smart, like they
Right.
do with the pyramids and all that shit.
Yeah. And when you were talking about CNC, there are some builders that are, you know, using CNC. But like, I think it was an important point that you made that just because you're using CNC on some of the processes does not mean by any means that this guitar is not built mostly by hand. You know, I didn't use CNC in this process, but I do know I've studied a bunch of luthiers and builders out there that do use that. For one thing, I'm in a unique position because I'm kind of like semi-retired and I've got a good, you know what I mean? I've got a good foundation where I'm not relying on this as my livelihood. But there are people out there literally where they want to make this their livelihood. And so one of the ways that they might be able to do that is to use CNC or some processes that might make them build a little faster and maybe be able to satisfy orders in a more timely way, which I totally respect too, because like you were saying, you know, just because I can maybe cut necks on a CNC, I still have to shape them. I still have to
Right.
put them on the guitar properly. I still have to do all this other stuff. But if I can streamline my process to the point where I can make 10 guitars a year instead of 5 or whatever and support myself as a builder, cool. That's totally cool. So yeah, I'm definitely for people using whatever tools at their disposal they can to build these things as they wish. So
No, you'll know. I mean, the more CNC that goes into something, it shows up. It's like I'm telling you.
Yeah.
It's like, you know, you can tell when you play the guitar. The difference between something like that is,
yeah.
you know, it's noticeable. It's a very noticeable thing. But yeah, I don't have a problem with anybody using CNC to get the ball
Yeah.
rolling. What's going to make or break the guitar is the small details. That's
Yes.
everything. The materials that they used and the small details.
Yeah, in one of our previous conversations too, you asked a great question, which was if I like listening to my guitar and playing it, how does it stack up to like other guitars, like, you know, built by somebody? You know what I mean? Like this is my DIY thing. How does it stack up to like something that is actually built by a more experienced luthier or like a mass produced thing? And that's such a great question because it I mean, there it spans a bunch of different areas, but in this area, guitar building, I had that same mindset. It's like I played it for the first time. I said it sounds pretty good, but what's the con? So I do have a nice luthier built guitar that I bought through Rosewood Guitar, shout out in
Uh-huh.
Greenwood, and it's a great guitar. Sounds killer. So I A/B'd it, and it sounds pretty damn good compared to this guitar. There's some things I noticed that like the other one sounds a little more clear. All the notes are a little clearer, maybe. There's more
Uh-huh.
definition in the guitar, which I think I could improve on. My guitar is a lot warmer than that other guitar. They're both cedar tops. The
Both
one I
rosewood back and
both
sides.
yeah. I think mine the '70s one is Brazilian rosewood. Mine is
Okay.
Indian rosewood. And so yeah, there are subtle differences, but by and large, when I A/B them, I think my guitar sounds pretty damn good.
It sounds
And
really good.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And so I was really pleased with the outcome and like I said, I mean, I benefited from the experience of the dude that I, got the videos from and the plans from. So which is cool. And so now hopefully I can, improve on that. But I thought that was a great question because I mean, just as recording, I've recorded songs in the past and stuff and I go, why doesn't my song sound like this fucking slick mass-produced record, and then you try to go
Right.
down those rabbit holes and find out, okay, how can I get my stuff to sound that great? And that's kind of the fun of doing things like that, whether you're recording or building a guitar or something. It's like, okay, well, I've got these bars that I hold up as the high watermark for what I think is a good guitar. All right, let's see if I can get there or get close to it, and that's kind of the fun of doing anything like this. Like you, as you're a recorder, you record a lot of great music and stuff, and play guitar, and as anything we do creatively or there are bars that have already been set by people
Right.
that you
Right.
want to try to rise to. And that's kind of fun. That's the challenge of doing this thing.
So I was really curious about that. Anything you make, you have like 15 minutes to be in love with it. You're
Yeah.
like, this is the best thing ever. This is
Exactly.
great. This is great. Until you start thinking about, you know what? Well, that other thing is great. And that's the way it was with amps and effects.
Uh-huh.
I remember I got really into DoD overdrive preamp 250s, and I made a bunch of them. And I had a vintage one and I had a reissue one. And I'm ABing them, and it's like none of mine sounded as good as that. And I'm like, is that really the thing that there's only a handful of parts? They have this. It's the same circuit. Is that just my bias? Like I'm just biased against my shit because I like the old stuff. I'm
Yeah.
sure there's a little bit of that, but the main thing is everything sounds different. We were talking about that too.
Yeah.
What is it? Is it an electric guitar? Is it the pickups? Is it no? It's the sum of all the fucking parts. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And that's
Yep.
true with anything. That's why you can have two guitar pedals and you're playing one of them. It's like, you know what, this one sounds better, and you can, it's just always the sum of the parts. So when you were talking about comparing your guitar to the other one, that yours was warmer and the other one was a little bit clearer, neither of those there's nothing wrong with either.
Yeah.
Of those. They're just different, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and the evolution of the guitar is so interesting to me too, because, the earlier iterations of guitar, which weren't even called guitar, like the lute and all the other shit, were different body styles, smaller
That's
body
where the
styles.
luthier comes
So
into
that's
play.
where the luthier comes into play. But before, like, so builders were trying to go, okay, how can we make it louder? Well, let's make the body bigger. Okay, cool. How can we make the top louder and stuff? Well, maybe the bracing. Let's mess with the bracing. And so, to me, all of that history and that evolution is what's so fascinating to me about the guitar. Not and the steel string guitar. How can we make
Yep.
that damn thing louder? Well, let's make a bigger body style and let's make the shoulder or the waist not as thin as the other ones, and we'll get more volume out of this box. And sure enough, Martin cracked that code, and the rest is history. I mean, those guitars are sought after. So again, that's another thing that just draws me to building these guitars is just thinking about all the history and the evolution that's gone on. But what's funny for me is, like you were saying, is I kind of am in love with these old ways of doing it, like these old builders, like Hauser's fairly recent, like he was in the 30s or 40s, but Torres and Ramirez
I'm
and all
familiar with
these
that
cats,
Ramirez. Yeah,
are
that's
old school, and they're generational, right? Like their kids
right.
and grandkids are building guitars, right? And so for me, like his plans are still kind of hearkening back to the old guys that made these guitars, and they sound great. You know what I mean? So for me, if I can build a guitar kind of the way they built them in the 30s, 40s, or back even farther in the 1800s, and it sounds great and looks great, that's good enough for me, man. I don't need to innovate. You know what I mean? Like, I don't need to innovate anymore in this. They kind of did all the work for me. I can kind of tinker and maybe see if I can get a little more clarity out of the top or stuff like this, but I'm content building a classical guitar that is built in the tradition of that history and that lineage. And man, I'm happy as a clam. And if somebody, and maybe eventually I'll never build for a person, because I think that's just setting myself up for failure. Even if I follow the guy's specs or whoever wants the guitar and they get it and they go, it's not
it's
really
buzzing.
It's too it's it's too much of a crapshoot. You know what I mean? So I'd rather build one, send it out into the world, and somebody finds it and goes, fuck, I love this guitar. Right. That's what I would do, like if I ever build enough of them to do that. But so that's where I come from. I love building things kind of in that traditional way, man, and putting it out there and saying, hey, this guitar is probably similar to the fucking Torres guitar that was built in the early 1900s or something, but dig it. It's a new guitar. That kind of jazzes me about that.
It's really interesting because there's some things, innovation is great, but not all the time. I mean, think about it. I think it's like I don't remember for sure the date. It might be like 1913. The speaker cone, the paper speaker cone, we still have it today. We've never found anything. And people have tried. There's like, some played with some plastics and, aluminum and things like that. The best thing for a fucking speaker is paper. It's the thing that they had in 1913 or whatever.
I love that.
And and with musical instruments, it's even more so. And people will like, you're just too traditional or you're too conservative. But it's like, they got it right. You know what I mean?
Yep.
And the classical guitars, and there were these little innovations and things like that, but that's something that, the 10,000 years from now, that's probably still going to be pretty much the same.
I think so. One of the interesting things about guitar building especially is the wood stuff we talked about before. Like all the tone woods that were used are not being used now because they're scarce and people have, used them up. But so that'll be an interesting thing as materials as things progress. But exactly like the construction process, these old guitars that Andre Segovia used and Torres, Tarrega and all these cats used, great guitars, man. So it's like, they kind of, it's not like they cracked the code. I've heard, and I used to be kind of down on the double top guitars, but I've heard some guitars lately, double top, that sound really
What is
good.
that? Explain.
So the double top kind of phenomenon in classical guitars is you have this really thin kind of honeycomb stuff between two really thin tops, super thin tops.
Okay.
So they'd be thickness way thinner than a normal just one piece top. And so you put these together and they're supposed to be, it's supposed to get you more volume out of the guitar, right?
Yeah.
And one of the things I've noticed in some of the double tops is they don't sound as colorful and not as much character in the sound of the guitar, to me anyway. But I have seen some builders build some double tops that sound pretty damn good. They sound warm and kind of musical and stuff like that. But so maybe they're coming along with that technology. But by the same token, I've heard some great volume guitars that are, just a single spruce top or cedar top with the right bracing. It just sounds fucking killer.
Right.
So
it's a great design. And those Yamahas that everybody likes, like the 70s, late 60s and 70s, the red label Yamahas.
Yeah.
Those, like a lot of those are they're plywood tops. You know what I mean?
Oh, that's
and
interesting.
what was so cool is like this guy says, I'm going to make a good sounding guitar with a plywood top.
Yeah.
And they figured out somewhere else how to make it up because I've played some of them and they're really kind of cool, like guitars. So and you're right. They're going to have to start coming up with different ways to build, different materials. And we are, I'll admit to it too. We are like conservative as people, and and the things that, the hills that we'll die on, like, just like when we were talking about the double top thing, it's like some people like, oh, that guitar has two pieces or, 3 pieces.
Right.
It's got to be one piece or something like that.
Yeah.
And like the neck, I mean, that was always a big Gibson thing when I was down at the shop. It's like, I don't want a Norland Gibson. I don't want a 3-piece neck or whatever it was, And it's like, well, here's their top of the line Super 400 that's a 5-piece nut. the top of the line Gibson guitar is a 5-piece neck, and you know,
Yeah.
and they made it like that because they were building a guitar that sounded incredible. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah.
We just picked things like, well, it has to be one solid piece of wood because in my mind it vibrates more. It's what, you
Yeah.
know, it's the best thing, and I fall into that all the time. You know, if somebody tells me something like, you know, I have a guitar and it's like, oh man, that's a 1-piece top. I'm like, oh really? Cool. It's really fucking cool. And I don't.
Yeah.
It might not even make any difference in the fucking world. We just key in on these things that we think are important, but those people. I'm fascinated with videos that I've seen these videos come down my feed sometimes of somebody with those little rubber hammers hitting tops. And I'm like,
Yes.
just
Yeah.
to get to the point of where you know what to fucking listen for. It's
Yeah.
like, doink, doink. It's like, oh, this is going to be good. How the fuck
Yeah.
do you know? You know?
Yeah, exactly.
I guess you got to make 400 of them, and then you start to say, like, you know, I just spent 2 years making this guitar, and it sounded like dunk, dunk, dunk.
Right.
I have to go for one that says like dunk, dunk, dunk. So yeah,
That's the way I feel about it too. Is that whole mysterious thing of tapping the wood and thinking it. I mean, I did it with this guitar. You know, I tapped the touch. Sounds musical to me. You know, I'm a novice, so it's like okay. And there are ways to you can put a speaker, you know, to run these frequencies through the top, and then you put stuff on the top, either tea leaves or something that form patterns, so you can see maybe how much the top is moving. You know, and maybe there's an optimal range, right, between in these frequencies, right, of movement. But the bottom line is you want the top to move as much as possible so it'll project sound, you know, but not be so thin that it will, you know, it won't hold up, right, under the stress of the strings and all that other
Right.
stuff.
The
So it's
balancing
a
act.
delicate balance. Yeah. But yeah, so I am just at the very beginning of that whole process about really tuning a top and feeling like I know at all what I'm talking about if I delve into that topic. But that's another fun thing I'm looking forward to, is being able to maybe get a little more knowledgeable about, oh yeah, okay, now I know, you know, bracing patterns and the size of the braces, what they should be to get this certain, or at least to be, you know, feel real confident about, yeah, this top is going to sound good, you know,
Right.
whatever that is.
A lot of the people you mentioned, like the classic people that came up with that, it's like a traditional too, as you mentioned. So a lot of
Yeah.
them, like they had people around that said, "See, this sounds like this. This is what it's going to do," because,
Yeah.
and then they passed that experience on to them, and so forth and so on. So I don't know, it'd probably be impossible for someone to say, "I took up this hobby of making these guitars, and I'm going to, you know, figure out how to tune the tops really
Yeah.
easily." Without making 400 guitars. I don't know.
Well, luckily, there's videos upon videos of
That's
people out
true.
there doing stuff, so I can glean the ones that I think they know what they're talking about. And
Or you could just wait for alien technology. I mean, they'll come down to help. They helped all the Egyptians and all these other people. They're gonna come for us. Yeah.
classical guitar ever known to mankind. Yes. Oh man. Well, cool. Well, that was fun, man. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to put together maybe a little video of the guitar, me playing the guitar, and people can hear how it sounds and see
You
it.
should.
And I'll show our listeners what I've created, and those who care can look, and those who
And
don't.
then we're going to raffle it off.
Yeah, we'll have a
We'll take the
raffle.
10th caller.
It's buzzing. Hey, this free guitar I got was buzzing.
I don't know. I don't think nylon strings probably don't buzz. That's the people that make them. That's why they chose nylon strings, because people come
They
back
don't want to
and say,
deal with this.
my electric guitar is buzzing when I hit it really hard.
Yeah. Well, hey, everybody, thanks for listening. We really appreciate it. We're still proud members of the Ruinous Media Network. Listen to us on all your podcast thingamajigs, and keep listening. We really appreciate it. We're going to try to kick it in 2025, man. See what we can do, and yeah, maybe some raffles and things. What do you think, Chris?
Yeah. 25 is the year. Yeah. Last year was 24 was the year, but this year, no. This is really the year.
This is it.
Yeah.
All right, pal. Sign off.
All right. Good night.
Bye.